All right, welcome everybody. Today we have Carrie Heaven, who is a powerhouse in mining. She's been in the space over a decade, is an award-winning leader, and someone who knows both the field and the boardroom. So let's welcome Carrie and welcome to the show. We're really glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Sweet. So can you start by giving me a little background on your life, kind of up until college, where you're from originally, what that looks like?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Tasmania in Australia, which is the little island right down the bottom. Not somewhere generally known for mining and not something that was ever in my family, but I always loved, my mum tells me now, I always loved looking at the machinery that was working on the side of the road when we go and walk down the road to school. And so that must have been a bit of a foretelling, I've no doubt. Grew up here, went to school, went to university in Tasmania, and then when I graduated, moved to the mainland and started working in mining.
Wow. Okay. So I honestly didn't know what Tasmania was until I think I met you, and I was like, oh, that is that little island on like the south side that nobody knows about. But super cool to hear and like to meet somebody from there. What kind of made you go into the mining space or geo as a whole? I guess you mentioned the equipment, but what made you choose the major that you did?
So I remember it really clearly. When I was in grade 9, I had this teacher who was an old exploration geologist, and when he was teaching the geology section of our course, he brought in his geopick and he put his hand on the table with his fingers splayed and went bang, bang, bang between all of his fingers with this geopick. And it was just like, learnt to do this out on a mine site and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, that's a cool job if you can do that.
Wow.
So I'm going to go and work in mining. That sold me. Yeah. I still can't do the trick, but
I don't think I could either with a rock hammer. Like your wrist, maybe with some safety gloves on, but not just barehanded. That's, I think, hardcore and pretty badass. So how did you kind of decide that mining is what you wanted to do? Because I feel like geo, you can do that in infrastructure, you can do it, really in anything, but mining is pretty specific. And I think a lot of people don't realize that you can go into geotech or geological engineering and then also still be in the mining space without having to be a mining engineer.
Yeah. So I never wanted to just work in a desk job. I wanted to be able to get out and go and do things, and the bigger the thing, the better. So mining in Australia with those big, big trucks really just screamed to me. But yeah, I didn't just go and become a geotech. I first started geology at uni, and because all I knew about mining was this guy was a geologist, so that's what I should go and do. And I honestly hated it. It wasn't for me at all. So geology is kind of all that grey in the middle, and I'm very, very black and white. And so
I said the same thing. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember like in all the classes I really, really liked in my first semester at uni, there were like 100 boys and I didn't know what they were doing. And so I started to investigate, and they were all doing this thing called engineering. And so before I went to uni, I remember talking to the careers counsellors and asking, well, what's this engineering thing? Because I obviously had all the prereqs for it. And as disappointing as it sounds now, I was told it's more for boys. It's probably not for you. Maybe science would be something you'd like better. And so I enrolled in science and never thought about it twice. And then here are all these guys in all the classes that I liked. And I'm just like, nah, I think I've got to go and give this a go. So
I love that.
End of semester 1, I changed and I started engineering, and I've never looked back. So yeah, it was meant to be that one. And then I didn't quite know how that was going to play into the mining field, but there were 7 types of engineering offered in Tasmania. And at that time, geotechnical was one of them. And so I knew geotechnical could work in a mine, and I just still had this, I want to work in a mine goal. So I picked that knowing nothing else about it.
Wow. So I guess what was your first experience working in a mine then? Was that right out of, I guess not right out of school, but a little bit later on?
I know. So I actually, while I was at university, at the end of each year, there's a 3-month break over the summer. And
Mhm.
for one of those, to get your degree, you have to go and do 12 weeks work experience. And so at the end of first year uni, a few weeks before, we went on a big field trip, all the geotechs, to the mines that they have in Tasmania. And so we
Mhm.
visited 3 or 4 different mine sites, and I think my mum still got it on her phone, but we got to this one and I sent her a text message. I said, "This is the one I'm going to work at. I love this one." And I managed to get myself a job there for the summer, and it was just amazing. There was something about that mine that I absolutely loved. And so, yeah, I've been studying for a year. I went and did this work at the end of the year it was called Avebury. It was a nickel mine on the west coast of Tassie, an underground one,
Mhm.
and I was in love with it. And so then I didn't have to go and do more work experience, but I did do another 12 weeks at the end of second year and 12 weeks at the end of third year. So I had 3 different mines and 3 different blocks of work experience before I'd even graduated, and I loved it.
Wow, good for you. I feel like that makes it easier when you actually do graduate. You have a little bit better picture of what you're actually getting yourself into and if it's what you actually want. So I guess, yeah, what were you hoping for when you first showed up? Like what blew your expectations of what you'd see, or was it, I guess, what you had expected you would feel like stepping onto that site for the first time?
It was the first one was such a well-rounded experience where I got to go and be in a truck and work underground and see the explosives and work in the office. And the team was all quite young. And so we'd go out and, have a games night and have a pub night and this and
Yeah,
that.
work
And
hard, play hard.
work hard, play hard, and I just
Mhm.
fell in love with all of it. And it was a really, really interesting experience, that first one, because at I was meant to work for 12 weeks and I only actually worked for 9, I think it was, maybe 10,
Mhm.
because at that point they closed the mine. The nickel price had dropped so quickly that the mine was no longer viable. And so I remember it really, really well that all the guys in the office were quite a young team and they're just like, nah, they'd never close the mine. It's got all this metal. We've got all this time to go. And you go underground and the guys underground are like 50-year-old guys seen this 100 times and they're just like, nah, this place is done. They're going to close it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like,
What?
the guys in the office, they definitely know what's going on. They're the technical stuff. And they were so wrong. It was the guys underground. And so that was such a really early learning for me, I guess, that, oh no, don't discount these guys who work on the tools. They have seen some stuff and they know what's happening. And so, yeah, we all got sat down and told the place is going to close and everyone's getting a redundancy, which from the outside, because it didn't affect me, I was going back to uni in a few weeks anyway. It was really interesting to see how that played out and what that meant to
Mhm.
people, and
Mhm.
everything from, people are starting to steal things because the mine's closing, and how people are reacting, and they've all just got a job up the road, and this, that, and the other. And at the time it was a bit of this, just who knows what's happening. But further in my career, I've gone through another 2 or 3 redundancies, and I
Mhm.
knew it was happening. And when it started, everyone else my age is just losing the plot and, oh no, this is the end of the world. I'm just like, oh no, I know
Yeah.
what to do, because I learnt that on my first ever work experience. And so
Yeah.
that resilience, I guess.
Yeah, that's a crazy experience to have so young and like early on in your career, because I feel like it is something you kind of experience later on, and it's a lot scarier when you have a lot more at risk or at stake. So do you feel like that kind of influenced your next steps on your future work, on if you wanted to be more operational versus, just sitting at the desk doing just engineering? Is that kind of your first glimpse of you knowing that you wanted to get more involved on that side?
Yeah, definitely. I loved it so much. I was definitely going to go back and be more operationally based. And so that's what I've done ever since, really. I've never worked for a consultancy. I've always worked for the miners, and most of the time been site based with those roles. And yeah, I love it.
Yeah, so I mean, I know just that you've operated equipment, you had to drive, I think haul trucks for at least a year. Would you want to tell me a little bit more of that? Because it kind of plays into what we were just talking about and understanding that operational side.
Yeah, sure. So I worked in Western Australia predominantly for the first few years of my career. And to become a mine manager in Western Australia, you need what's called a mine manager certificate. And that's what I wanted to do. I had some experiences early on and I thought, no, I want to run this site. Like, I think I've got a bit to give, and that's what my aim was. And so to do that, I needed a mine manager certificate. And one of the criteria for that is you need to spend a year on the tools. So that's driving haul trucks, diggers, this, that, the other. And it had to have a minimum 3 months of shop crew. So I went out, and this is kind of where one of those played out. I got a redundancy from one of these sites because the site was closing and there was no role for geotech at their other site that they were operating. And so I went and negotiated with the mine manager and said, well, instead of accepting this redundancy, would you give me a position as a haul truck driver? So with the proviso that I can go and spend some time on bomb crew because this is the end goal. And he's obviously got one of these tickets. He understood what you needed to do. And he said, yeah, absolutely. So it wasn't part of any program or anything. I actually, rejected my redundancy and took a different contract as a haul truck driver and went and started to drive these big trucks. So there were 150-ton dump trucks, and they're huge, these things. So sitting in the cab of one of those is the same height as sitting on the roof of a one-story building and driving that around, basically. So, yeah, I went and did that, and I got to go and I think I spent 5 months on bomb crew in the end, and I actually went and got my shot firer's license as well, and I loved it. I was so in love with this shot firing. I had so much fun that I almost thought, I'm not going back to engineering. I'm just going to blow things up because my
There's still time, Carrie. That sounds like a fun time, honestly, like the coolest part of it all.
Yeah, no, it was great. But in the end, no, I did go back into engineering, obviously. But the things you learnt being on the crew were just so different and so interesting. And there were some changes in management while I was on the crew. And so the management didn't necessarily know that I was the old engineer from down the road. And to see how the crew interacted with those new management changes and the new this and that, it gave me such an insight that if ever I was in that position, don't come in and do what this guy did, and don't be the one who, there's a standard uniform and one of these guys only wore black jeans and everybody else on the site had to wear blue work pants. And these crew guys, it's the littlest thing, and they're just like, oh, bloody black jeans, thinks he's too good for the rest of us. And you're like, okay. So even that littlest thing, that's how it's seen and that's how it's understood by the crew.
Changes the dynamic. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. So, I always, when I go to these sites, I wear the uniform and I look the part, because little things like that made such a difference to how you were perceived by the crew and the workforce, and
respect. Yeah. So absolutely. Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's what I aspire to be like. Boots on the ground, in the trenches with them, because then it's like you're a team, you're working together, you have the same end goal, everybody wins. Mm-hmm. What are some early moments kind of in your career that you've had to prove yourself? And I'm guessing that's probably been, with the driving and the engineering and any field work you've had to do. I'm sure you've had, plenty of examples of that.
Yeah, definitely. And it was really interesting early on how, when I got my first job, there were 2 graduate engineers employed. One was myself and the other was a male. And it was really interesting to see that dynamic between, oh, well, come with us to the other guy. We'll take you outside. We'll show you how to do this, get your hands dirty. And I'd say, well, can I come too? And they say, oh, well, no, you sit inside and read the computer and this, that, and the other. And so there was already that different dynamic early on, which as a graduate, I didn't know that was going to happen, and learning how to deal with that was really different and really interesting.
They don't teach you about that, do they? Huh?
No, not at all. And so, trying to figure that one out. That in the end, that site wasn't for me. The way that the team and the management in the geotech department taught me, or treated me, I should say, didn't really align with myself, because there was that different dynamic. So it wasn't necessarily proving myself, because I could go and try and I still wasn't being treated the same every time. So it was learning to make that decision, and it was time to move on to somewhere different and more learning what I wanted to work with and what values I really respected. So not picking the job with the best roster.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So I think that was probably more important. And then when I found somewhere to work that aligned with my values, that was the time to get out and show I've got this, and this is how I can work and what I can do. And it was always rewarded for putting that hard work in. But I found it didn't matter how much hard work I put in, it had to be at a site that aligned with my values.
I mean, that makes perfect sense. Be in the right environment that recognizes your value and celebrates that. How do you handle the situations where your expertise are it's questioned, just in any way? Because of course, you want to avoid environments that don't celebrate you and value you, but some environments challenge you and question your expertise, your authority. So how do you usually handle that?
Yeah. Really early on, it bugged me when you can kind of tell when they're questioning your authority versus just the gender of the person that's giving the authority. And so that really, really bugged me. But I found out that I can use that to my advantage as well. So one example would really get to me is if my male counterpart would go out and talk to the shift boss and say, "Oh, you've got the digger in the wrong spot, mate. You've got to move it over here," because they understood the mine plan and what we're trying to do. And the shift boss would say, "Oh, yeah, okay, we'll go and move the digger." And if I did the same, they'd say, "Oh, no, you're wrong." And they'd really dig their heels in. But if I put on a slightly different voice and say, "Oh, what do you think would happen if we moved the digger over here?" And the shift boss would say things like, "Oh, I think I've had a good idea. I think we'll move the digger over there." And so just putting that back on them to make it their own thought as opposed to me trying to direct.
It's reverse psychology.
Yeah, that's right. So it really annoyed me to start with that I had to do that, but now I just kind of embrace it, and it's working with the teams you've got to get the best results. And so if that's how I can influence and try and teach and do whatever, well, that's how I do it and lean into it.
How you play the game. I feel like it's kind of how I've had to learn. It's a lot of psychology and learning to work with teams and different dynamics, and that changes between people. So do you have a time that you can think of where you've really had to trust your gut on something that you ended up being right about, just within work?
Yeah, so one that I was really, really proud of, and it was when I was a truck driver. You had to put in like a daily hazard card or a weekly hazard card about something you've seen that you think, we need to go and fix that. And being the geotech, driving past, I'm like, there's something wrong with this wall. Every single time I'd say, there's something wrong with this wall. This rock's fallen out. This has moved slightly. Just from what I could see driving past, it was a big wall on the side of the whole road. And the shift boss got so annoyed with me and told me, "Look, stop handing in these cards. We can't do anything about the wall. This is not it." And there was no geotech on site. There were no radars like that. It was just the survey team and the geology team. And so they'd chosen not to. Yeah, that's it. And then one day I got this call and they said, "Oh, Carrie, can you park up your truck? We just want to come and have a chat." And they came down, and the shift boss with the surveyor, and they said, "Oh, we've just been up and we've found some really big cracks, and it's behind this wall you keep handing these hazard cards in for." And I was just thinking, well, I told you guys, basically.
Told you so.
That's it. So they took me off the haul truck knowing, so the surveyors and the technical team was all still the same as the one I'd previously worked with. And the shift boss and most of the crew had been around when I was the engineer as well. So they all knew that was my experience. And so they took me off the haul truck and said, let's go and have a bit of a look. And from my experience, I'm just like, yeah, this is moving, and it's starting to move a bit. So I did what I could there. I got some prisms and I put them out, and we were manually reading these prisms, and I remember plotting them in an Excel spreadsheet, which is not how you do it. There's programs and things to be able to do all of this automatically, but it kind of went back to be a bit more rudimentary, and I had like a big A3 picture that was just printed out of this wall, and I'd go around with a big thick texture in this picture and just be drawing on it. Oh, this has changed and this is moving and this is where a prism is. And everyone just for a couple of days was just like, oh yeah, there she is with a big picture drawing things on. And anytime there was a question, I'm
just
like,
scribbling on the walls.
So it was by no means technical what I was doing at this point, but it was working for me and what I had at the time, because there was, as I say, no geotech department. And then a couple of days in, I'm like, this is going to fall. I just knew the trends were all going that way. And I was out on the side of the pit, and I was just looking. It was about 4:00 in the afternoon. And so there are 2 pits at this site, and I called up the shift boss who, I'm working for, and I'm just like, look, get the stuff out of the pit. I think this is going to go from what I've seen on these like 4 prisms I've got and my drawings on a big picture. And he's just like, oh, okay, sure. Just listened, like took everything out of the pit, moved it to the other one, and I closed the pit. And I got back to the office, and the person who was the mine manager was not the same one who I'd negotiated this deal with, and he had never seen me working as an engineer, didn't know, and he came in swearing and carrying on, and who's this girl who's just closed my pit, who's a truck driver, and blah, 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 and just losing the plot. And I'm just like, no, here's all my data, here's what I think this thing's going to fall. And so the data said it was going to fall at like 5:30. But there was just something when I remember standing out on that pit and just looking, I'm like, this is starting to move, and it's going at about 4:00 in the afternoon, closed the pit, and it fell at 5:15. And it was so close, and with the limited resources, I was so proud of what I did. And it was so nice to have that crew who I'm working with, and they're just like, oh, well done.
They trusted you. Yeah. I mean, thank goodness you were there. Thank goodness they trusted you. Thank goodness that you got everything out there, because disasters like that happen all the time. And, especially if you don't have a monitoring system set up, it's like, no, I see this and it's not good, but a lot of the time it's too late before, you really start to see those signs. So I think it's really important to trust your gut, especially when you have the data and the drawings or whatever you make up to back it up, because in the end you were right and you saved, who knows what, you might have saved a life, you might have saved, just money as a whole. I think that's incredible. And I think a lot of women need to be reminded to do that a little bit more often than they do. So rolling into the next question, what do you think is the biggest misconception people have about women's capabilities in mining? So that can go kind of, anywhere across the board of operating the haul trucks to being in engineering.
I think there's just a general, women haven't done it in the past, and so they're not the ones who know. And, there's all this experience from the men, which is not wrong. Like, they've got a lot of experience, a lot of time on the ground, but that's not saying that diversity in the workplace isn't a good thing. And so one that really sticks out to me with the haul truck drivers, we find that haul truck drivers who are females take better care of the trucks and get better tonnages and things because of how they drive these trucks. Whereas
maintenance.
Exactly. And that to me was really clear during my time driving. Anytime I saw something that looked a bit weird during my pre-starts, I'd call it up and just get it double checked, whereas the men would just keep driving, and they'd make fun of me for, well, you get your truck checked every couple of days. I'm like, well, I'm not the one who's the specialist on the truck, and something looked a bit different.
That does not make any sense. It's like, no, why would you be trashing on doing the right thing? That does not make any sense to me. But yeah, it makes sense that women can be a little bit more organized and care about maintenance and be a little bit more tidy. We just bring a different perspective that, men don't always have. And that doesn't mean to exclude theirs. It just means to include ours and the same capacity, I think, because we all have something to bring, but I mean, maybe we just maintain our haul trucks better, and that's just how it is, you know? So, how do you think the industry is?
Want to, sorry, I was just going to say, I think the want to ask questions as well is a lot stronger in a female than a male. I've found that just through experience, and I don't think that's a bad thing, and I think that's something should be encouraged. And one thing I've found really interesting is working in these geotech departments, people obviously have questions and they don't understand it, and the males on the crew won't go and ask the male geotechs, but they will come and talk to me. And I think it just poses this, maybe I'm not as threatening, maybe I'm warmer, maybe I'm not going to laugh at you when you ask a question that you think stupid. I don't know what it is. I can't tell you, but I can tell you that I get asked a lot more questions than my male counterparts. And so if that's something I can bring, I think that's great. And I think more questions is always better. The more people understand, the more they're involved and the more they're invested.
Yeah, and then, I mean, the end product is better that way too, because then you're not making as many mistakes. But if you do, you can learn, you have guidance. Yep. It's better to ask the question ahead of time rather than to have to pick up the pieces, you know, when it's too late. So I could really see that. I think, you know, we women really want to do a great job. They have really high expectations for themselves, and they want to understand everything so that they can do that, I feel like. So it makes perfect sense. So how do you feel like the industry's evolving with supporting and retaining women in mining specifically?
Yeah, so I think, well, I can definitely see there are more women in the industry now than when I first joined, and that's brilliant. So overall, it's becoming more accessible, which is great, and women are joining the industry, and hopefully we're retaining them. That's very important. How exactly we've done it, I don't think there's any clear-cut way, because we're trying to recruit over so many different jobs and so many different opportunities. But the fact we're getting them is a great start. I think one of the things that I've seen more and more of, there are women's groups, women's mentoring programs, this, that, and the other. And I suspect all of those play a small part, but it's all those things together which is going to try and increase and retain women in the industry. So anytime you see one of those, I think they need to be supported. And so I'm heavily involved with a couple of those different organisations, and yeah, really, really support it. On the other side, I think there are some negatives that I've seen as well, where there's been a real drive to try and improve the numbers of women in the industry and improve the numbers of women in management positions. And there was a period of time a while ago where women were being promoted over men, probably, to management positions to try and say, well, we've got this, and, you know, here's these great women. But they weren't necessarily putting women in those positions who were ready to go into those positions. So it had almost a negative effect, where if those women then didn't succeed, it was, well, they were the first women we put there. They didn't succeed, and now that just kind of proves women aren't good at that. So I think it's not something we can change overnight. It's going to be a long process, and we need to hire the right women in the right positions to make sure they succeed and to support them when they get to those positions. And that's almost more important than getting them. Like, getting them we can do, but retaining them is the harder bit. So we need to make sure that, yeah, as I say, they're promoted at the right time and they're supported when they do go through that, because otherwise we lose them at a higher level, and that's where we're lacking the women. There's often not many in management positions, and that's what we need to aim for in the future.
Yeah, and that takes retaining them to get there, totally. And I think it's a collective effort, even just across the different industries, like into more manufacturing or like technology. I think it's still similar. Like, it's very, you know, outweighed by one gender, and it looks, I think, different in each industry, and how you can bring them and include them without it being forced, because when you force it, I just don't think it ever goes well. Was there like a mentor or somebody like that you had that kind of helped you through all of this, or I guess, was a role model for you?
In the industry, there's one guy who I met maybe 4 years into my career, and I'm still really close with him and talk to him frequently. He's not necessarily a mentor in something was set up and he's an official mentor and blah, 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 but he was a guy who I met and his skill set's not exactly the same as my own. So we complemented each other in that respect, but we got along, and he was willing to spend that time to have some of those conversations about, be a sounding board and, well, this is where I want to go. How do you think I get there? And what are the next steps? And he is currently in a position, he's running a geotech company, which is great. And so he's seen it from the outside. He's not site-based, so he can kind of see it differently as well. And just to have him as a sounding board. But for me, finding a person who was higher up and had all that experience was more important than finding a female who was in the industry. And whenever people tried to set me up with a mentor, it was always a female, and the females didn't have experience and all of that to draw off. So I think it's really important to find a mentor that is what you're looking for. If you want a female who's gone through and you've got hard times and want to, be able to bounce things like that off someone who's done similar, brilliant, that's what you need to find. But if you want to, see your career going a certain way, if your mentor's a male or a female, I don't think it matters. And so for me, I found a really strong male mentor, not in an official this capacity, but he's been a great friend to me and a great sounding board.
Sweet. No, that's a great answer. I think it's honestly hard to find, mentors that are women that have, 20 years, 30 years experience. Like I still have to struggle finding that and getting into more involved in committees and the groups that are specifically, women oriented and technically oriented. It's been the first time that I've really been able to see who those people are and that they exist. Before I hadn't really experienced that. So do you have any, more advice than what you just gave to somebody who's just starting out that doesn't really have many people that they feel like, or role models that they feel like they can identify with?
Yeah, so I didn't always have this guy, and I will say I had a strong support network as well. So I'd made some really good friends in my engineering course. Once again, all male, not a lot of females going around in my industry, but they have been fantastic. They work in different branches of engineering to me, but understood the industry enough and had that different point of view that anytime I was having a problem, they were once again there to go out and have a drink with, have a bit of a sounding board. Were more than happy to listen and help out where they could. But in general, for me, listen was the big part. I just needed someone to kind of talk these things through with. And that's how I process things, is talking about them and kind of figuring the answer out myself. Everyone's different. So that's what worked for me. And then I have a very strong family network as well, and most of my family are females. I've got lots of aunts, lots of female cousins. I've got a sister, I've got dad as well, but I had a lot of females in my family, and so I guess some of that female empowerment has come from very early on and how I was brought up. But having those different networks. So I got the female support from my family. I got peer support from the guys that I did engineering with, and then I had this mentoring support from someone who I'd met along the way and I had clicked with. So it's not just one person, it's that whole network you build for yourself, and I think it's important to have those networks.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree, and I think it's important to recognize those networks that you have and to remember that you have them, and that, you might not have a specific mentor, but you have, colleagues that you get along with, or old coworkers that you get along with that you can still talk to. And they don't have to be older or more experienced always. Maybe they've experienced something that you haven't experienced yet, and that's something that they can teach you. You can teach each other. It's really about being open. And I think sometimes if you can't find people you can identify with, maybe it's time to turn inward and look inside and see what you're looking for and, the direction that you want to head in. Because sometimes that's what makes it confusing, is just not knowing yourself and what you really want. So one last question for you. If you could change one thing about the mining industry tomorrow, what would it be?
Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? I'd love to say something simple like more diversity or things like that, but it's not as simple as that. And I think if you change that tomorrow, it's going to significantly change the industry in itself. I think just the understanding of diversity. So often we bring different women, different genders, different cultures into the workplace, but because of what it historically has been, there's this inherent bias towards that diversity, and there's no training necessarily about how to work with different cultures, how to work with different genders, how to have that inclusivity. And so often the guys on site who have got all this experience and they're great at what they do have ended up in some sort of leadership position, but no one's still teaching them. And so they struggle, as well as, new women coming into the industry, new cultures, whatever, are going to struggle for a reason. But these guys who have all the experience are also struggling because no one's teaching them, well, what you did and how you treated people 30 years ago is not how we do things now, and that's not what's accepted in the company and the structure and whatever. So I think ignoring that is as much of a problem as trying to recruit and retain new diversity in the industry, because if no one teaches them, well, we can't then get angry at them if they're not doing what we want them to.
If they don't know any better, yeah. Well, and that's all about the retaining part too. It's like if they're put at the senior level or management level and they're in control of people and managing people, if they don't understand people, then of course it's not going to go well. I feel like a lot of the time you're good at what you do with, technically or operationally, and nobody's teaching you the people side and how important individuality is, because I think that, kind of goes back to culture and where you're from and who you are and how everybody's perspective and strengths and weaknesses have a place at the table. Everyone belongs at the table. And if people can't get to that point, it's like, well, you can't ever get through to them that a team should be more diverse or more balanced if they don't see the value in it. And that's kind of hard to have to explain to somebody what that value is when you can see it. It's something that, like, I think it's just something that you feel, that it's empathy, and recognizing that everybody comes with their history, their culture, who they are. And it's just a matter of balancing that, because that's the whole point of a team, I think. So, yeah, I think you're spot on. And I agree 100%. And I think it's definitely not something that can happen overnight, because if it does, like you said, it's forced in my head, which is not like genuine and authentic, because I want people to not be forced to have to feel that way, more be open, have their mind opened up a little bit to start to accept new ways of thinking or new ways of life from people. I think you're exactly right. So yeah, we'll be, we're on the same team. We're out here trying to do that. I think, I have hope for us. I think the industry is moving towards that direction. We just have to keep having, those conversations and those even training sessions they're starting to have about it being more like people oriented, because that ties into safety. And, I think that's great. That's what we need more of. So thank you for having this conversation and for taking the time to answer all my questions. I think your experience and your insight, your perspective is really something that I think the world needs to hear, but especially our industry, especially women in our industry. And I really hope that people hear this and, take it to heart and see you succeeding and kicking ass, and know that it's possible, that, you just might have to get your boots dirty, your pants dirty, say no a couple times, tell people a whole slope's failing, draw it up, sometimes that's what it takes. But again, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. It's been good fun.